I used to think Mammoth Caves was just another adventure, a tick off our list. It was supposed to be fun, a weekend to explore the shadows with my best friends, to test our nerves in the endless dark. But somewhere down there, under miles of stone, something went wrong. Now, one of us is missing, and I swear I can still hear him calling. We'd been going for hours, our voices echoing through the tunnels, each one mocking the confidence we had when we started. There was me, Sam, and my friends Luke, Jared, and Ben. Ben was always the daring one, the first to wander ahead, the one who'd get us into trouble just to laugh it off. But when he didn't come back, no one was laughing. It's strange. We retraced our steps, searched every crevice, calling his name until our voices scraped raw. Nothing. Just endless silence, heavy and swallowing. And then, the faintest echo, like Ben's voice, drifting from somewhere deep in the shadows. Luke was the first to hear him calling. He stopped dead, his hands shooting up as we walked, telling us to listen. We froze, straining against the thick silence. "Did you hear that?" he whispered, his voice barely louder than a breath. None of us had. But as we stood there, letting the silence settle around us, we heard it. A faint, distant call, almost swallowed by the stone around us. It was Ben's voice, unmistakably. He was calling out, the sound barely reaching us but bouncing off the cave walls in strange, warped echoes. The direction was wrong, though. The call wasn't coming from where we had last seen him. It was coming from one of the tunnels we hadn't traveled down. But maybe, somehow the paths were connected. It wasn't impossible for cave tunnels to intersect. We were probably about 2 miles down at this point, so deep that the silence felt alive, closing in around us. The chill in the air seeped into our bones, and every breath echoed back like a reminder of how far we had come. The walls felt tighter here, the space around us shrinking with each step. Our lights cast shaky beams on the rough stone, cutting through just enough darkness to keep us moving. We'd packed extra batteries, sure, but even with the supplies, an uneasy feeling twisted my gut. Still, leaving wasn't an option. Ben was down there somewhere, and we couldn't just abandon him in the dark. We walked down a few hundred feet, calling out Ben's name into the dark, then waiting in silence, hoping for any kind of response. The cave swallowed our voices, leaving only the faint drip of water somewhere far off. Then, after what felt like ages, we heard him. It came from behind us. "What the fuck?" Luke whispered, his voice tight and shaky, eyes darting back toward the path we had just covered. Jared, louder than any of us, shouted back, "All right, Ben, you can stop messing with us now, man. This isn't funny, bro." I wanted to believe it, that Ben was just messing with us, hiding in some shadowed nook and waiting to jump out. But as I stared into the empty tunnel behind us, a chill crept over me. I couldn't shake the feeling that somehow, it wasn't really Ben. We backtracked, our lights slicing through the shadows as we searched every inch of the area. We moved slowly, scouring every nook, every crack in the walls, but there wasn't a single trace of Ben. Not a footprint, not even a scuff mark. He was just gone. Eventually, we returned to the central cavern, slumping down on the cold stone to catch our breath and regroup. I told the others what had been gnawing at me, the dread curling around my thoughts, but Luke was quick to brush it off. "Oh, come on, man. You know Ben's just fucking with us," he said, his tone forced, like he was trying to convince himself as much as me. "Well, how did he end up back here then? When was he down here before?" I shot back. "I'm telling you guys, something isn't right." Before anyone could answer, Ben's voice echoed again. faint but unmistakable. This time, it came from the tunnel we had seen him go down first. "Come on, guys, this way." His voice drifted down the rocky corridors, a lazy drawl that somehow felt wrong. Jared sprang to his feet, shouting down the tunnel, "Screw you, Ben! When I see you, I'm gonna beat the shit out of you!" Then, we heard it. A low, chuckling laugh, the sound echoing but from a completely different tunnel. Luke and Jared exchanged glances, the bravado draining from their faces. It was like the air had thickened, and now they felt it too. Something was off. A chill crept over all of us, settling in our bones as Ben's laughter faded into the shadows. We huddled together, whispering hurriedly about what to do. The idea of leaving came up quick, but Luke shut it down fast. "We can't just leave Ben down here, guys," he insisted, voice firm but edged with unease. Jared shook his head, glancing toward the distant exit. "I'm going. I'll call the cops and tell them our friend's missing. I'll come back with a search party." It wasn't a bad idea, honestly. Part of me felt relief at the thought of professionals with equipment and experience. But Luke wouldn't budge, his jaw set, determination in his eyes. He wanted to keep looking, convinced that Ben was close, just around the next corner. Jared didn't wait for more argument. With a last look back, he took off down the path toward the exit, his flashlight bouncing along the walls until he was out of sight. Luke and I stood there in silence, the weight of the decision hanging heavy between us. Eventually, we decided to search a little longer. Just a little longer, we told ourselves. After Jared disappeared from sight, Luke and I ventured down the same tunnel Ben had vanished into. We called out, our voices barely steady, and after a moment, Ben's voice drifted back, faint and distorted, like it was caught in a slow echo. The sound seeped out of a dark, narrow crevice ahead, just wide enough for us to squeeze through. We moved cautiously, each step slower than the last, feeling a prickling sensation on our necks, like unseen eyes were watching us from the shadows. The path bent sharply to the right, creating the illusion that it might loop back toward one of the other tunnels. Luke forced a chuckle. "See, he's just messing with us." But as we rounded the corner, our lights caught something that made us stop dead. A jagged hole yawned open in the middle of the path, wide and deep, cutting off the tunnel. The space was too narrow to walk side by side, so I trailed behind Luke as he edged forward and aimed his flashlight down into the darkness below. Luke went silent, his light fixed on something I couldn't see. I waited, the quiet pressing in, until the tension grew unbearable. "What is it?" I whispered, trying to peer around him. When he turned to me, his face was drained of color, eyes wide, lips parted like he couldn't quite find the words. He swallowed, barely managing to get it out. "He's down there," Luke said, his voice trembling. My blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" I stammered, heart pounding against my ribs. "He's down there, Sam," Luke whispered, voice crackling. "Dead." The words hit me like a punch. I stood there, numb with disbelief, until Luke grabbed my arm, his grip almost painful. "We have to get out of here," he said, voice tight with terror. Without another word, we turned and started back, moving fast but steady, our lights casting frantic beams along the rough stone walls. As we reached the tunnel that led back to the central cavern, another voice echoed through the darkness. "Guys!" Neither of us paused. We broke into a sprint, feet pounding against the ground, breaths ragged in panic. We didn't care where it was coming from. We just wanted out. In his haste, Luke stumbled over a jagged rock and fell hard, his flashlight skidding across the ground before shattering into pieces. I stopped, reached down to pull him up, my light sweeping the walls as I moved. And that's when I saw it. A figure, pale and naked, crouched at the far end of the tunnel, watching us with hollow, empty eyes. It looked almost human, but something was horribly, horribly wrong. "Oh my God," I muttered, my voice barely a whisper, trembling as I stared at the figure. Luke turned, catching sight of it, his face twisting in terror. He grabbed my arm, jolting me out of my daze. "Come on, Sam," he urged, pulling me forward. We didn't look back, rushing through the darkness, desperate to put as much distance as possible between us and whatever that thing was. Every shadow felt like it was closing in on us, every echo stretching our nerves tighter. As we reached the main tunnel that led out of the cave, we saw a figure lying on the ground ahead. Jared. He was sprawled face down, motionless, his flashlight lying a few feet away, casting an eerie glow on the stone. "Oh God," I breathed, heart racing as we knelt beside him. He must have tripped, maybe knocked himself out in his rush to get out, but when we turned him over, the breath left my lungs. His face was unrecognizable, crushed and bloody, as if someone had beaten him down, over and over. The horror of it froze us in place, and I could barely think, only feel the cold grip of fear sinking deeper into my bones. That's when we heard it, a voice drifting from the shadows, but this time, it wasn't Ben's, it was Jared's. "Come on, guys, this way," the voice called, soft and taunting. I swung my flashlight around toward the sound, heart hammering, and there it was, standing just beyond the light's reach, pale, humanoid, but wrong in every way. Its skin was chalky, almost luminescent under the beam, and its eyes, solid black, empty, and endless. The thing stared at us for a moment, then turned, its movements jerky and unnatural, and ran down the tunnel, laughing in Jared's voice, a sick, twisted echo of the friend we had known. "What the hell?" Luke whispered, voice barely audible over my own heart pounding. He grabbed my arm, his grip trembling. "We have to get out of here, man." I didn't need any convincing. We bolted, feet slamming against the stone, the darkness stretching ahead of us like a maw, ready to swallow us whole. As we ran, the creature's footsteps echoed close behind, its pace relentless. My heart pounded, my breaths coming in ragged gasps as we pushed forward. Suddenly, Luke stumbled and fell, hitting the ground hard. I skidded to a stop, spinning around, and that's when I saw it. The creature had caught up to him, gripping his leg and starting to drag him back into the shadows. Luke clawed at the ground, his face contorted in terror. Without thinking, I shone my flashlight directly on it, and as the beam hit, the creature shrank back, raising its long bony arms to shield its huge black eyes. It couldn't stand the light, that much was clear. I stepped toward Luke, light fixed on the creature as it hissed and retreated, slipping back into the pitch-black depths of the cave. We backed away slowly, both of us trembling, the silence around us settling like a heavy weight. We kept moving, trying to keep our steps steady, though every nerve in our bodies screamed to run. Luke fumbled in his bag, pulling out his spare flashlight, and now with both beams cutting through the shadows, we scanned every crevice, every dark corner around us. The creature was silent now, but its presence clung to us, a feeling so thick it was hard to breathe. We both knew it was still near, lurking just out of sight, watching and waiting. Minutes stretched on, each one more suffocating than the last, but then, just as panic threatened to take over, we saw it, the cave entrance, a sliver of remaining daylight spilling in, piercing through the darkness like a lifeline. It was close, a beacon of hope after the nightmare that had nearly swallowed us whole. We made it, or at least, We thought we did. Step by step, we edged closer to the exit, the sunlight drawing us in, so close I could almost feel its warmth. But just as we reached the final stretch, the creature dropped down from above, a blur of pale skin and black eyes, crashing into Luke and sending him sprawling to the ground. I whipped around, frantically aiming my light, but it was too late. In an instant, the creature pinned him down, smashing his head against the stone with brutal force. Paralyzed for a split second, my mind screamed at me to act, to do something, but instinct took over. I turned and ran, abandoning Luke's final muffled cries, leaving my friend behind. Tears streamed down my face, blurring my vision as I pushed myself forward, barely seeing the light ahead. When I finally burst out of the cave into the fading daylight, I collapsed to the ground, gasping for air, chest heaving, and the weight of loss crashing over me. The tears came hard, unstoppable as I lay there, shattered, knowing I was the only one who had made it out. As I forced myself to stand, steadying my breath, I heard it. Luke's voice, faint and choked with fear, calling out from the depths of the cave. "Sam, please, help me." I froze, every instinct screaming at me to ignore it, to remember what I had seen, to remember that Luke was gone. But hearing his voice, broken and desperate, twisted my insides. The guilt clawed at me, sharper than any fear. I had left him. I had abandoned him. The pleading continued, soft but relentless, each word pulling at the frayed edges of my sanity. Some part of me wanted to turn back, to run into the dark, convinced he was waiting, that I could still save him. But another part, a colder, darker part, knew the truth. It wasn't Luke. It was the creature mimicking his voice, sinking its claws into the last threads of hope I had left. And yet, what if somehow it really was him? The thought tore at me, leaving me stranded there, helpless and shattered, unable to move forward or look back. Finally, I forced myself to run away from the cave, each step heavier than the last. I had to leave. I had to get out and tell someone what had happened, no matter how impossible it all seemed. But as I reached the edge of the forest, the realization settled in. I couldn't tell them the truth. They would never believe me. No one would. I could already picture the looks of doubt, the whispers, the judgment. So I rehearsed the lie as I stumbled into town, every word twisting in my throat. I told them we were stalked by someone in the cave, that he'd ambushed us, attacking Jared and Luke. I described a faceless killer lurking in the dark, hunting us down one by one. It was easier that way, easier than trying to explain the unexplainable. They listened, and they wrote it all down. But even as I spoke, a chill ran through me. In the back of my mind, Luke's voice still echoed, pleading, calling me back into the dark. The cops didn't let it go. They pressed me for hours, asking the same questions over and over, watching my every reaction. Soon enough, they began talking to my friends and family, probing into my relationships with the group. I could see it in their eyes. They suspected me. I was the last one out, the only one who made it back, and my story didn't add up. They searched the cave for days, combing through every passage, every cavern. Eventually, they found Ben's body, crumpled at the bottom of that pit, limbs twisted at unnatural angles. But Luke and Jared, they were gone. Their remains were never recovered. And now, when I close my eyes, I still see the darkness of that cave, hear the echo of their voices, distant and pleading. No one believes me. And maybe after all this, I'm not even sure if I believe myself. The only thing I know for certain is that I'll never step foot in another cave for as long as I live. The thought alone makes my skin crawl, my heart race. The darkness isn't just unsettling to me now. It's a living, breathing terror, wrapping itself around every corner, every shadow. I'm afraid of the dark in ways I never imagined. Paranoia gnawing at me every time I turn off a light. Even here, in my own home, I could feel it. The creature's gaze, lurking just beyond the glow of my lamp, hidden in the pockets of darkness, patient and unyielding. It's waiting for me. I could feel it, lurking, watching, waiting for that one moment when I'm left alone in the dark. And I know, deep down, that it won't stop until it pulls me back into the shadows, just like it did with them.